Hey there, welcome to the Dentelligentsia podcast. Today we have Chuck Cohen from Benco Dental. We're excited to talk to him about a multitude of things, but most importantly, we want to help dentists have the tools to make the right types of decisions in their business. Welcome, Chuck. How are you?
Welcome. I'm great, thanks. I'm very flattered to be asked. Thank you, gentlemen, for inviting me to participate. And I love what you're doing out there in the market on the real estate side. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, I mean we appreciate that, and we absolutely appreciate having you. We're going to dive right into some heavy questions. So, give us a piece of advice that you would give to a dentist who is looking to make better business decisions. Pretty general, but
Oh, I'll go to one that I think will be near and dear to your heart. Own your own real estate,
absolutely.
period. The
Yeah.
number one way that dentists, independent practitioners, can build wealth, in my opinion, is to own their own location. And by the way, I'm just giving you advice that we use in our own business together, which is my brother and I are co-owners of our business, and we're a third generation family business. And our main location is in northeastern Pennsylvania, and we own it ourselves and we rent to ourselves. You're going to be paying rent to somebody. It may as well be to yourself. Assuming that you can do it, you're in a market that enables you to be a real estate owner, and you can find a location that's reasonably good, not A location stuff, but B level location. I think owning your own space is the number one wealth builder that dentists can employ over the course of their career.
We appreciate that, and we, certainly in the Michigan market, while there are some exceptions in other markets here, I'd say that that's certainly the prevailing sentiment. Nearly all of our doctors look to own their own real estate, and it's something that we help them do on a daily basis. So
That's excellent. Most dentists don't understand some basic rules about real estate, so hopefully these are ones that you teach as well. Number one is paying 10 years rent is about what you're going to pay to own the location. So if you're planning on being in a location for longer than 10 years, you're absolutely in better shape to own than rent. Number one. Number two is what most people don't realize about dental offices is they very rarely move. I'm in dental offices that have been dental offices under different ownership for generations, because once you have all the equipment in place and the plumbing and the whole thing, it's just hard to move a dental office. And then number three is dentists need relatively good space, relatively strong locations in order to be successful in their business. Sometimes they're a little too conservative, in my opinion, on finding the right location and then buying, or maybe being patient enough to find the right location to buy. But when dentists decide to be a owner of their own real estate and they make the investment, I think almost every time they end up building more wealth by the end of their career than they had before, or than they would have had if they were renters.
Yeah, no, we agree. I mean, certainly we would always advise them to explore all their options, but generally speaking, if there's a great opportunity to buy, that typically trumps it. What I'm sure you guys have lots and lots of different um, uh, things here, but can you share some success stories where Benco made a significant impact on a dental practice's business?
I mean, we do it every day, which is kind of exciting. I know you guys are in the Michigan market mostly, but we've got a terrific sales and service team in Michigan, and they take care of customers every day. When you're talking about successes, though, I'd really point you towards this Build Your Future program that we have. So if you think about it, the biggest decision that most dentists will make during their career is some version of buying or building a new location. Sometimes they've worked in a DSO for a while, sometimes they've been an associate, sometimes they bought a practice and they're just ready to move on, but it's really hard to do. On the other hand, getting it right is a huge boost to any practice and the doctor's wealth. And getting it wrong is hugely expensive and very frustrating. So we put together a program, we think it's unique in the business, called Build Your Future. It's designed for dentists who want to do a design build. And it's basically bringing them in for a 2-day program with a number of experts to teach, and there's no charge, to teach them the ins and outs to buying and building their own location. I always consider it a success, and almost always we have this version of a success, if they walk in feeling scared, nervous, reluctant to move forward, and they walk out feeling confident and knowledgeable. We don't always get the equipment order from the deal. We generally do, but not always. So it doesn't always lead to an equipment sale. But in my opinion, in my observation, and I go to a lot of these myself, it almost always results in a more confident dentist. So that my favorite stories are the ones where, I'm in an office 5 years before that, that doctor had attended one of our Build Your Future programs. And they say almost invariably, I wasn't sure what to do. I went to this program. You guys taught me the ins and outs. I walked out feeling confident. And today I'm in a larger, better location than I would have been otherwise. That to me is the most heartwarming story, because that doctor is able to do better patient care, attract better team members, do better for their practice, build more wealth, have more success, and feel better about what they do. And honestly, isn't that what we're all here for?
That's great information, Chuck, and I certainly hope everyone out there's taking notes. We've heard a lot of wonderful things about the Build Your Future opportunity. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that looks like, just from head to tail?
Sure. So our keynote speaker is a unique individual named Tristan Hamilton. We love him. Tristan is one of the few dentists in America who's also a registered architect. By my count, I've only been able to find a handful. Tristan is kind of unique. He's actually a practicing dentist. He owns a practice in several practices in North Carolina, and he's a registered architect. And he's got a unique story. I don't want to tell his story. It's his own story. He's one of the most knowledgeable, clearest thinking, ethical, honest dentists that I've ever met. And that says a lot because I know a lot of dentists. And so he is our keynote speaker, and he speaks the language of dentistry and the language of architecture.
Sure.
So he's kind of a unique voice there. In addition to Tristan, we also have some experts on construction, dental equipment, technology, some practice management tips, how to hire your first staff, all that kind of stuff. So we've got a number of experts there. We compacted into a day and a half. And most importantly, the thing that people say they like the best is we encourage everyone to come with a plan. So in other words, they've gotten some sort of location they're looking at, or they've gotten a preliminary plan, and there's a hands-on portion where they actually work with one of our designers and sometimes with Tristan himself to get some ideas on how to make their plan even better. Because I'd love to tell you that it's the dental equipment that makes the difference, but it's really not. I mean, we got great dentists who practice with mid-mark equipment, DCI equipment, the brand of equipment and how you practice, it's all kind of important. But the most important thing is the design of the office. If the office is designed, the facility is designed in a way that flows for the patient and enables a very efficient business model and enables a lot of throughput, it's going to be successful. So we're really hyper-focused on making sure that design is right and making sure the dentist is thinking bigger than probably they were thinking before about the size of their facility and their future expansion plans.
How often do you do that, and where?
So here's the interesting thing. We do 3 a year. We have demand enough to do more, but the problem is, or the challenge is, that Tristan, who's our keynote speaker, only wants to do this 3 times a year. That's how special it is. And we want Tristan to be there. So we do 1 a year at each one of our center point locations. So we have 1 in Dallas, 1 in Southern California, and 1 in Pennsylvania. If we could, we would get Tristan to do it every month, because the knowledge is just so in demand, and we are oversubscribed almost every time we do it. But we're limited to 3 times a year because Tristan, he has a young family and he doesn't want to travel that much. And I think it really says a lot about him and who he is. He's not of course he gets compensated for his time, but he's not a main speaker. He's a dentist with these small kids and he doesn't want to be away from them too often.
We can relate. So, I mean, you've already taken this into a different direction than we were originally going to go, but it's interesting because, you talked about these different showrooms, and from us as real estate people, we are trying to kind of paint the vision. And if you're starting up a practice, or maybe you bought a practice and you're outgrowing it, and it's time to think about the next iteration of your facility. Those showrooms, I hear about those tours, bringing them. I mean, that seems so interesting, and it really kind of helps to illustrate, because really, especially for startups, these folks they're competing with existing businesses, and one of the ways that they compete for staff, one of the ways they compete for patients, is having a beautiful, gleaming new facility. You want to talk more about that?
Sure. So we've got the largest, I think they're the 3 largest dental showrooms in America, probably the world, although I don't really know that, but I'm assuming it. We've got 1 in Dallas, 1 in Southern California, and 1 in Pennsylvania. And our philosophy is pretty simple. Number 1, we like to offer choice. So we like to offer dentist choices, and there are different things that work well for different kinds of practices. It all depends on what the doctor's strategy for their practice is. And so we like offering choice and we like offering options. Number two is we are really, really focused on the design of the facility. You can have a small space, but if it's designed properly, it works really, really well. And we can spend as much time as you want on design. It's something that I'm truly passionate about. The design of the practice is more important than the equipment you choose. And the design of the practice really works depending on what you want to do. Do you want to be a high-tech office? Do you want to offer laser dentistry? Do you want to offer a comprehensive care? There's lots of ways to practice dentistry. That's one of the things I love about dentistry. And the design of the practice needs to reflect the strategy of the doctor. And then number three is we really think it's important to get doctors to think bigger than what they were thinking before. In general, not always, in general, dentists tend to be pretty conservative, not surprisingly, because dentistry is about millimeters and small spaces and making sure the occlusion is exactly right. So dentistry tends to attract people who are detail-oriented, and oftentimes this is usually the biggest investment they're going to make. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but in general, dentists sometimes don't see, because it's not their expertise, the benefits of thinking a bit bigger, borrowing a little bit more money, going to a little bit of a larger facility, something that allows them to grow as they grow their practice. So those are the three things that really are the foundation of the Centerpoint visit. Number one is offering choice and seeing, feeling, touching what's out there and making sure that dentists can make the right choices for their practice. Number two, really, really focusing on the design and the flow and of the facility, making sure that it's efficient and effective and beautiful and really reflects what the doctor wants to do. And number three is, in most cases, getting the doctor or doctors to think a bit bigger than they were thinking before. Almost always, that's something that they're happy they did later.
Well, that one is an interesting one for us because it's kind of a self-serving one when we bring that up because we benefit, based off of maybe our commission for taking a bigger space. But the point is that you get one shot, and you're kind of locked in, and so you don't know what's going to happen, and maybe you don't need to outfit all of those ops, but if you plan for a couple more ops, it may really benefit you in the future. So that we see that quite a bit.
Yeah, so there's one, I couldn't agree more, Nick, and I think thinking longer term is important. As I mentioned before, dental offices, not just dentists, dental offices very rarely move, period, because it's a hassle, it's hard, the equipment doesn't move very well. So thinking about the future is hugely important. There's one general rule of thumb that I think dentists in general don't know about that I like to share, but I think it's so important. But it requires a little bit of background. I think of a dentist, and I think most successful dentists think of their dental office as like a factory. Now, I don't want to insult the level of healthcare we're talking about here. Dentists do offer healthcare, so by saying the word factory, it's not to diminish the level of patient care that's required. But a factory is a place where people go to make stuff, right? So if I were to say to you, you're going to build a factory to make shoes, you would say, okay, Nike, Geox, I'm going to understand it. We're going to have machines. We're going to have throughput. We're going to have materials that come in one end, like leather and rubber. And then we're going to have machines and people run the machines. And at the other end, there's going to be shoes that come out. It's a mental model that we all have for building a factory. If I were to say to you now, Nick, your goal is to build a factory that makes 1 million pairs of shoes a week, and you want to build it in 2,000 square feet. You would say to me some version of, are you out of your mind? You can't make 1 million shoes a week in 2,000 square feet. That doesn't work. You need factory, machine, people, the whole thing. It's why shoe manufacturers are not based in Midtown Manhattan, because it doesn't work. But yet, if you talk to a dentist and you say, hey, doctor, where do you think you want your gross production to be in 5 years? And the doctor says, oh, I want to have a $3 million practice. All in, that's great. Doctor, how many operatories do you have? Oh, 4. I used to have 3. Now I'm going to 5. And it's like, doc, let me explain this to you. The average, according to the ADA, is you can gross around 200 to 250,000, maybe a little bit more of production per operatory. The operatories are like the machines that make shoes. You need a certain number of operatories in order to deliver the kind of patient care you want and in order to produce the revenue your practice wants. So if you want to have a $3 million practice, you got to be thinking in terms of 8, 10, 12 operatories. I can't make you an office that's 5 operatories that realistically can gross $3 million a year. Now, there are exceptions. You can be in Midtown Manhattan. Like, I get it, special. But in general, the number of operatories you have dictates the revenue you can produce in the facility, almost
Right.
without bound, right?
Yeah.
And you need a certain size location in order to produce the kind of numbers you want to produce. And most dentists don't realize that.
It's
Go
yeah.
ahead,
It's
Bernie.
one offs aside. You're right for planning purposes on a deal to deal basis. That is something. It's a conversation we have with our clients all the time, and it's as you can imagine, it's scary if you consider the amount of money that's going into a new project and trying to future proof your growth. On one hand, you don't want to take more space than you need today or over the next few years. On the other, it's even scarier to think that you might be hamstrung by space in 2 years into a 10-year term, or in a building you buy, even worse. You're already looking at another location to expand and you can't. So trying to thread the needle there and provide the right balance for our clients it's a critical part of the puzzle for us.
It's a critical conversation. And I would add to it, you need a certain amount of gross production in order to afford the technology that most dentists want to provide these days.
That's right.
So if you want to have a CBCT machine, which everybody should have, and you want to do endo and you need a CBCT machine, you want a 3D printer and you want maybe a mill, and you're going to have these technologies, you need to have a certain amount of revenue in the practice in order to support that level of technology. In order to have a certain amount of revenue in the practice, you need a certain number of operatories. So in general, the rule of thumb is about $250,000 of gross production per operatory. It's a pretty simple rule of thumb. In my opinion, it's one of the most underutilized rules of thumb that we have in dentistry. Not enough dentists understand it. As soon as it gets explained to them, most of them get it because it's intuitive, but you got to really sit down. And I think it's our job, your job on the real estate side and our job on the dental equipping and design, office design side, to really have those difficult conversations. Say, look, where can we skimp somewhere else? But you're not going to be happy, Doc, because we're not going to be able to get you a $2 million practice in 5 operatories.
To the point of, we're going to ask you about some common mistakes that you see dentists make, and I think you touched on one of them right there, and that's really a function of not being educated or having that information. Any other high level concerns or mistakes that you see
Yeah.
doctors performing that might help them to hear now?
Yep. So we talked about a few of them already. I'll just reiterate. Number one is getting the design wrong, not really focusing on the design, not going to a world-class dental design team to do your design. I'll brag for a minute here, and I would say that Benco has the best designers in the business. I know sometimes we don't charge for it, so it makes it look like it's kind of free, so therefore, or it's included, and therefore it's not very good. We make a point of having the best designers in the business work for Benco. So number one would be getting the design wrong, or not sweating the design, not going to a world-class designer. Having an architect do your design who doesn't do dental offices and doesn't understand flow and efficiency and all the things. Number two is undersizing the practice versus where you want to go. Number three, which is related to number two, but we talked about it for a few minutes, is not really understanding the practice strategy before you do the new office. The office has to reflect the practice or the business strategy. There's lots of ways to practice dentistry. You can be the cheapest dentist in town. You can be a Medicaid focused practice. You can be a family oriented practice. You can be an implant oriented practice. I'm not here to judge which strategy is the best one. I've been enough offices to say that I've seen every one of those strategies play out successfully. The trick is to align the strategy with the facility and the marketing and the team so that everything works authentically and congruently. If you're a dentist and you've got a strategy and you're aligned on what it is and you build the rest of your business around the strategy, any strategy can be successful. But if you want to be the high-end dentist in town and you're working in a facility that's 20 years old with old chairs in the waiting room in the reception area that are curved because there's so many tushies have been in them, that's not going to work. So aligning the practice strategy and identifying the practice strategy with the facility is one of the things you got to do. And that's a big mistake I see a lot of dentists make. And then the last one, which I'll share is, and this one may not make you guys happy, so I'll own that, is I think one of the biggest mistakes dentists make is the second office, right? So what do I mean when I say that? We have a lot of dentists who go out there and they either get sized out of their current office or they get a deal that they can't refuse and they end up going to a second office. I'm a huge fan of a second office if you're on your way to your fifth office. But if you're just going to do a second office, in my opinion, it's the biggest mistake dentists make. It adds to your expenses. You can't be in both places at the same time, and yet you don't have enough size to make the efficiency work. What works is 4, 5, 6 locations. I'm a big fan of that practice model owned by one dentist or a group of dentists and finding the efficiencies of the back office and a call center and all the things you're going to do. Big fan of owning multiple offices is that's the way you want to practice dentistry. Call mid-market and I'm all in. I'm a big fan of one office that's sized properly, that's run well, where you can be there every day, supervise it, and make sure it delivers the patient care and the team building and whatever you want your practice to be. I am not a fan of a second office if that's all you're going to do, unless it's part of a bigger strategy. Honestly, we make a lot of money at Benco selling doctors equipment for second offices, but I am very consistent in saying I'm not a fan myself, and I would recommend against it unless it's a bigger strategy to really grow things out. Because by definition, you can't have your fifth office until you've had your second. So if your second is a way to get your third and fourth and fifth, huge fan. If it's just a second office, sort of not thought through, oh, I got a good deal, a guy retired, you don't understand, it's 8 miles away. Not smart.
Well, at the end of the day, we are simply consultants, and we try to gather as much information so our clients, these dentists, can make the best decisions for their business at that time. Market changes over time. Situations change, and so certainly, that's why our clients hire us, is to help them, because they're making these unbelievably expensive decisions. But you got to have a team approach, and you have to put it all together. You can't do this if you don't have a strong business plan, if you don't have a strategy, if you don't have the team members in place to kind of create a successful project. And so, we deal with really nervous, really unsophisticated, unfortunately, but dentists who are traveling into uncharted territory. We got to do our best to hold their hand through that process. We really combat that feeling by giving them a roadmap so that they have an understanding of what the next step looks like. And I think that kind of ties in really to your comment there, is like, hey, if that's part of the plan, that's great, but if you're just listening to the peanut gallery and you think that's my next next step, maybe you should think that through. But I imagine as people that have boots on the ground and are talking to dentists throughout the whole country, you guys have some of the same problems that we have, where this is a really emotional, this is a really scary decision when they're deciding to start their own practice. How do you guys handle deal with that? I mean,
Yeah, so it's a good question. The one thing I just want to push back a little bit, Nick, is I think dentists have a very unfair reputation as not being good business people. I think dentists are excellent business people. Now, a lot of it comes from the gut, a lot of it is intuitive, but when you look at the profit and loss statement for most dental practices, they're pretty successful people. Where I think we need to be helpful with them is really help them articulate their strategy. So one of the things that we coach our team on is, whether you're an equipment specialist or a sales rep, one of the first questions you want to ask before we plan a trip to Center Point or talk about the design is, doctor, what is your practice strategy? Now, here's the secret. The secret is almost every dentist that I have met has a practice strategy. Where they stumble a bit is articulating it in a confident way that enables you to build around it. So almost every dentist knows the kind of dentistry that he or she wants to practice, and I respect that a lot. I mean, I love dentistry because there's so many different ways to do it, and most dentists, by the vast majority of dentists, offer a terrific patient experience. They're very skilled in what they do. They're inherently good business people. So I love when they are ready to invest in themselves. Where we as helpers can be most helpful, in my opinion, is to ask that key question, doctor, tell us about your practice strategy. What kind of dentist do you want to do? What kind of dentistry do you want to practice? How do you want to approach the market? And then our job is to help them get that out and probably write it down and then build a business plan around it. Not a formal business plan that sits on a shelf, it's 100 pages long, but more like, all right, if that's the kind of dentistry you want to do, then let's find you a location that fits that. Let's find you a size facility that fits it. Let's get the equipment in there that does it. Let's help you find the team members who help you deliver on that level of patient care. That's really the key. So when it comes to startups, the answer to your question is pretty similar, which is I think where we can be the most helpful is to say, tell us about your practice strategy. Understand there's lots of ways to practice dentistry. Now our job is to help you figure out how to do that, how to implement and execute on that strategy efficiently, cost effectively, and in a timely way. And if my experience is almost every dentist that has a good practice strategy that they can articulate and can build around, they are successful in their career.
Benco was the first dental equipment supplier to use AI to help, in product recommendations. Can you talk about any new innovations or tools Benco is using these days to help dentists, or how that's going?
Yeah, so great idea. So we do use AI in some of our sales tools and some of our recommendation engines with our customers online, especially on the consumable side. But since we've been talking mostly about equipment and design, I know that's the area that probably the people who watch us are going to be most interested in. I'll talk about some of the innovations we've had in the past, and then I'll talk about some of the things we're working on. So number one is these large showrooms were really one of our innovations. We were the first distributor to go with these very large showrooms. Most distributors in the past have had very small showrooms, and there's just not much you can do in these small locations. Second thing is on the design team side, we've been very innovative, ahead of the curve on things like 3D visualization and helping doctors really see what the facility is going to look like, helping bring them in and showing them ways that we can design an office. One thing that we came out with not long ago hasn't gotten the traction that I would have thought it would is this idea of the office nucleus. The office nucleus is a clever design that we came up with that really enables the nucleus of the practice, which we would define as the sterilization area, the inventory supply center, and just generally the general nuts and bolts of supplying the day-to-day dentistry. If you think about it, on the supply side and the sterilization side, those areas of the practice have to be working at top efficiency in order to supply all the operatories and all the dentistry that's going to be done. So we got our design team together a year or two ago, and then we published a white paper that talks about this idea of the office nucleus and how the office nucleus can be the center part of a design that really is much more efficient than what's been out there before. At the same time, it also takes into account new sterilization and asepsis needs, infection control needs for a post-COVID environment. So on the design side of the practice, we're not just designing what we've done before, we're actually trying to come up with new designs that really move dentistry forward. And then finally, we've been out really sourcing a number of new dental products that we think will enable dentists to practice dentistry more efficiently. The hot topic these days, and I think we're at the forefront of it, is 3D printing. People ask me all the time, well, when is 3D printing of crowns going to replace milling of crowns? And the answer that I always give is no time soon. The most effective dental offices these days should have a mill and a 3D printer at some point in the future. 3D printing may be good enough. You won't need a mill, but I think that's 5 or 10 years down the road. The prices of many mills have come down significantly, and there's all kinds of new mill technology out there. But I think the most high-tech offices going forward are going to have 3D printers and mills, and are going to be using both technologies to supply dentistry, same-day dentistry to their patients.
How, whether it's a percentage or just a sense you have, how whether practices are bringing those services in-house, the millwork, the 3D printing versus outsourcing it to a third party, right, to a lab. How often are you seeing dentists bringing those services in-house, and is it strictly a function of their revenue and if they can afford to, and of course the space needs and so forth?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes down to what dentists are willing to do and what they're not willing to do. So the dirty little secret is that approximately 70% of crowns are single unit posterior crowns. And we know that data from Glidewell. Glidewell was released it in the past. Most dentistry, when it comes to making crowns, is not in the smile zone. It's in the posterior of the mouth, and it's single unit. A single unit, single visit crown making machine, whether it's a mill or a printer or both, makes a lot of sense for most every office. What doesn't make sense, in my opinion, if I were a dentist, would be to be chairside making crowns for the smile zone, where shading is so important, and or multi-unit restorations. That's stuff that should go to a lab. I'm a big fan of labs. Labs are not going anywhere, thank God. Labs are the unsung hero of dentistry. But when it comes to making single unit, bread and butter, single visit crowns, I think a mill and or a printer is a game changer for most dental offices. So I don't know how to answer your question, Remy, directly, except to say that if I were a dentist, and what I advise dentists is 70% of the crowns you make are going to be single unit posterior crowns. Let's get a machine that can do that chair side. So it's single visit. You can charge a little bit more because you don't have a second visit. You can save money because you're not bringing the patient back. And most patients hugely would love to get it done in a couple of hours in one visit as opposed to split over two visits.
No, that's good education for me and Nick, and for anybody watching too. So I think that's a great response.
We talked a little bit about that technology that's changing the dental industry. Is there anything else that you can think of that, a younger dentist should consider to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are talked about a lot, but I do think that they're worth repeating. Number one is 3D imaging through a CBCT is becoming standard of care. I think the challenge for many dentists is not just to make the investment, but to learn how to read the scans. But basically, Gordon Christensen says nobody should be doing any endo without a 3D image. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You have canals that get hidden behind other canals. You really don't know how to do it. So it goes without saying that we should not be doing any implant surgery without a 3D image. And it goes without saying, or it should be going without saying, that no endo should be done without a 3D image, which makes it basically says almost every general dentist is doing some version of endo in their practice. They need a 3D image. And a 3D image, the good news is they're getting cheaper and better all the time. So they're not they're certainly within the price range and size that they should be in every dental practice. Second one is I'm a huge fan of the 3D printing revolution that's going on. For those of you who haven't seen it, the new Midas system from SprintRay is a game changer. It enables the 3D printing of a crown that is about 72% filled ceramic. So it's not, a milled crown is 100% or 90 something percent ceramic. But now 3D printing, this new SprintRay system, which is just out as we speak, it's brand new, just got launched a few months ago, and it's just getting delivered, going to be delivered in the fourth quarter of this year, will enable the printing of 70% ceramic restorations, which are strong enough to work in the posterior and are approved as ceramic restorations for insurance companies, which means that they are standard of care. So those are the two things I think that are going on that are game changers for dentists: 3D images and 3D printed crowns. Mostly at this point through SprintRay, but there'll be other ones out there pretty soon. But those are game changers for dentists and very, very exciting for the profession and patients.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully this is good news, but I would say the vast majority of startups and really startups and dentists relocating and expanding are all interested in adding CBCT if they don't have it, or or upgrading. I mean, it's a given. Obviously, there's a price consideration. That's a big ticket capital expense, but in my experience, the doctors that we work with all understand the investment and the value that it provides. So that's almost unanimous across the
We
board.
see the same thing. And so we're seeing that too. And then I would just throw in there what I mentioned before, which is make room for a mill, because
Yeah.
mills are not going away anytime soon. And mills are going to be a part of dentistry for the next foreseeable future. There are going to be restorations that doctors are going to want to do, like with zirconia, that's just not going to be printable. They're going to want to do 3D milled restoration. So, very excited about that too. But I agree, most startups are going the technology route, and they should. That's what makes dentistry an exciting profession.
We'll certainly be incorporating the conversation about a mill and 3D printer into our meetings and so forth, along with CBCT and so forth. So that's we appreciate that.
Is there any special data, that you can think of that dentists should be tracking that they could maybe use to make better business decisions than any ideas that you can think of besides chairs and seats, or there's anything?
Well, we mentioned a few of them here. I'll just mention a few more. First of all, there's a lot of data in every practice. And so one of the things that we're keying in on these days in our business is this idea about revenue cycle management. So I'll mention that for a minute. there's two ways and it's pretty simple, right? There's two ways for a dentist to make more money in their practice. And thank God most of these guys are all good, solid capitalists and they like to make more money while providing great patient care. We approve of that all day long. One way is to try to save money or cut your expenses. The other one is to try to be smarter about your revenue. So we feel like on the supply side and the equipment side, we can be helpful on those. Now, of course, the biggest expense that a dental practice has is people. That's not something we get involved in our end of the business, but most dentists understand that. The revenue side of the practice, most dentists don't spend enough time understanding. And that means insurance reimbursements, procedure mixes, understanding what's really driving their practice. So I'll put a little plug in here for procedure mix. So if you think about, and then we have the commercial is that we do this for practices and we can be helpful. But basically, if I were to say to a dentist or you were to say to a dentist, doctor, what's the single 2 or 3 things you can do to make more money in your practice? I think a lot of the answers we'd get would sound something like this. Oh, it's the insurance company reimbursement. I have to figure out how to get paid more for what I do. Okay. Number 2 is, I want to add ortho to my practice. I want to be an Invisalign provider. I want to do more implants. So something around this procedure, like I want to add a new procedure to my practice. Okay. Also a good answer. The one that doesn't get talked about enough is really what we call the procedure mix. So basically it's this idea that it's not just the revenue is not just a function of the reimbursement rate, it's also a function of the number of procedures you do by category. And what some dentists don't understand is you can do a benchmarking study that says, for a practice of your size, we see that, X% a month, or I'm sorry, there's a certain number of CBTC, let's keep it simple, CBCT scans that a practice of your size should be doing every month, and you're way under that. Or you should be doing this number of cleanings or deep root planings and scalings for a practice of your size. So there's ways that you can benchmark your data against other practices of a similar size. Now, there's a fee to doing it. It's not generally very expensive. We do it at Benco for something around $1,200. The procedure mix analysis and the benchmarking of it is very eye-opening for a lot of practices. What we find a lot of times is that there's undercoding. So basically they're doing this procedure, but only billing the insurance company for this level of procedure. There's a miss of some mixes, like you're only offering this procedure this many times. You might want to think about getting better at it or doing it faster. But there's this whole idea around data collection and then analyzing and benchmarking the procedure mix that most dentists don't see. But they focus in on reimbursement rate, or they focus in on offering a new procedure that they weren't doing before, but they miss this nuance around benchmarking the mix of procedures. That is eye-opening and game-changing for dentists who do it.
Okay, so just so I understand, you're saying for a mere $1,200 or so, Benco will do an audit of a practice, their revenue-generating services, against an index or against the recommendations for practice their size, and then provide goals or benchmarks for them to improve on based on the mix, the recommended mix.
Yes. We call it a revenue analysis. Okay. And basically it's like, last time I checked, it was $1,200, maybe like 13, maybe over a little bit, but I would say yes. And it is eye-opening for almost every dental practice because in general, they come up with, and they're not hard to implement. Usually there's some undercoding going on or but basically 3 or 4 switches in the practice, small switches, can have thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact on the top line of the practice. Do the same amount of dentistry, but just make more money doing it.
It's seemingly a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer. The challenge is most dentists either don't believe it or they haven't ever heard of it. And so with the dentists who do it, we have testimonial after testimonial. It is absolutely a game changer for the practice.
That's awesome. Can you discuss the importance of patient experience and how that impacts the business side of dentistry?
Absolutely. We have a concept at Benco. It's not our concept. It was invented years ago by a gentleman who, to my knowledge, was invented years ago by a gentleman who worked at the ADEC company. And we call it, the clever name is through the eyes of the patient. And so one of the things that we sort of talk about in our facility, and again, it's not something we make a lot of money on, but because we mostly make our money from selling gloves and dental equipment, is really, what is your patient experience like? And it starts with, when was the last time you walked in the front door of your practice, doctor? Most doctors walk in the back door, through the staff area, they get dressed, they never actually spend any time in the reception area. They don't experience their practice from the perspective of the dentist, of the patient. They don't experience what it's like to interface with the office manager over a counter or through a wall, or how that all works. So the first rule of thumb is try experiencing your practice through the eyes of the patient. Walk in the front door, look at the waiting room. Is it Starbucks worthy? Is it a place that people want to hang out? Are there enough plugs to plug computers in? Do patients feel comfortable there? Second thing is, what is it like for the patient to interface with the staff, the business staff? Is it, oh, God forbid, through a window that moves? I still see those windows that move. It's like, oh my God, really? This is 2024. And there's still practices out there that have a sliding window. It's like, oh, really? So what is it like? Is it clean? Is it easy for the patient and the office manager, the office staff to interact with each other? Is there enough room for the office staff to work with, or do we have 3 people in a space that should have 2 people? Like, what exactly is going on a daily basis between the patient and the non-clinical staff members? And then finally, what are the general look of the office when it comes to carpeting and furniture? Are there holes? Does it smell? But basically, it starts with this concept of, what does your patient experience look like through the eyes of the patient? And doctor, when was the last time you actually spent a few minutes figuring that out and then investing in it?
That's a great point. While we don't historically frame it that way through the patient experience, we're often doing the same type of exercise with our doctors, and it's usually, again, on the front end of a project where we're talking about the intangibles, because that's what the patient experience or your staff experience is. If you consider how much time your staff are spending in their space in a practice every day, add to that the patient experience. For us, we're talking about the investment in a space and making sure that the space is state of the art, comfortable, clean, because that's ultimately how you attract and retain talent. For one, whether it's associate doctors or hygienists, support staff at the front desk. And it's also the fastest way to get your patients to go home and tell their friends about you, right?
Absolutely.
So you can't place, it's invaluable.
So let me give you 2 rules of thumb that I coach doctors on. Number one is, and they both have to do with the reception area, because the one thing we know is every patient experiences the reception area. Even if they walk directly in and go directly, they are experiencing the reception area. Sure. 2 rules of thumb. Actually, I'll give you 3. Number one is, your reception area should feel as welcoming as a Starbucks. In today's society, 2024, people are used to a Starbucks environment. If you walk into your own reception area and it doesn't feel at the same quality or level of a place like a Starbucks or a local coffee shop, you have an opportunity. Number one. Number 2 is, you should redo your reception area about every 5 or 6 years. It's well trafficked. There's a lot of money. If you're not spending a little bit of money in your reception area every 5, 6 years, you're missing out. And that's not expensive. It's wallpaper, it's furniture. And number 3, which I just mentioned, is the cheapest money you can spend. I mean, for 10 grand or 20 grand and 2 days of work on a weekend, you can get somebody to come and put up some new wallpaper and some paint, get a few new office chairs, just rehab that area a little bit, get some new carpeting down. It's the best investment you can make in the patient experience.
That's really interesting.
When you upgrade your reception area, everybody will think your crowns fit better. Everybody will think your hygienist doesn't hurt as much. I mean, it's the cheapest area. And by the way, we sell reception furniture, but not a lot of it. So there's nothing in this for me except to say it's every patient is experiencing the reception area, and most dentists, many dentists, underinvest or don't invest often enough in something that's relatively inexpensive, easy to do, and will improve the patient experience dramatically.
I would also like to add, we've talked a lot about younger dentists, but just when we're talking about dentists that are towards the end of their career, sometimes we go in there and we see, T12, like old light fixtures that they don't even make anymore, and just it just looks tired and depressing. And it seems like that's a really easy way for them to make their practice more marketable, or so just spending, like you said, $5,000-$10,000, and they can effectively put a little bit more life into that, and so it makes it easier for the buyer to not have to do that, or makes that practice more attractive. I mean, I think I'd pay more for a practice like that, for example.
No question. Nick, you asked before about mistakes dentists make. One, you just referenced one, and I'll just reiterate it, is not investing in your facility in your 50s.
Bingo.
So that's a big mistake a lot of dentists make, because the 50s, if you think about in general for people, I'm talking about in general people who are married with kids, your 50s can be a little bit expensive, right? You got a kid getting married, you got young kids going to college. Like the 50s is where dentists tend to spend a lot of money. On the other hand, your 50s are your highest earning years as well. So in general, your 50s, and so your 50s is a place where you're making a fair amount of money, but the expenses seem kind of big. At the same time, to not invest in your practice in your 50s, you're missing the opportunity, because by the time you get into your 60s, you're thinking about transitioning and selling. The equipment just gets more old, more tired. It doesn't look as good. It doesn't show as well when you're going to sell your practice. So one of the things that we try to coach dentists on all the time is your 50s is the perfect time to either do that new building, you get to practice another 5 or 10 years, bring in the associate, transition the practice, or upgrade the facility you have, spend a little money in your 50s. It does seem like there's a lot of other money going out, but you can borrow money these days. Interest rates, even at a little bit higher level, are still low historically. They make investments very affordable and very easy, and very, you can get a high return on investment. So mistake that dentists make is not investing in their practice in their mid 50s. By the time you get to your early 60s, it kind of seems a little, that's not too late, but it kind of seems like a little bit more daunting. It's hard to get your money out of the investment. Mid 50s is a perfect sweet spot to invest in your practice.
That's awesome.
It's apropos that we're talking about the latter stage of dentist career, because we're getting into the latter stages of our podcast here. So let me ask you this: what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
That I
Or
ever
is there a piece of
received?
advice that you can share with us? Yeah, yeah, that stuck with you.
I'm not sure it's the best one, but it's one that I come back to a lot. And that is that I love dentistry. I think dentistry is a wonderful career. I think dentistry is a wonderful profession. I think dentists, by and large, are great people. And as I mentioned before, generally speaking, inherently good business people. They want to do a great job for their patients, and they want to build a successful business. And I think whether it was really luck for me because I was born into it, but I thank God, I thank my family every day that I have the opportunity to spend time serving this wonderful profession. So the best advice that I would give, or the best advice that I received that is worth sharing here, is if you're lucky enough to be a dentist, you are a lucky person, and be sure to invest in your profession in your future, because almost invariably those investments will turn out to be bigger and better and more successful than you thought. Dentistry is terrific, and we all are lucky to be able to spend a portion of our lives in this great profession.
We ask everybody what why they're passionate about what they do, and we frankly didn't need to ask you, because it's you've answered that, time and time again on this podcast. So it's clear that you're passionate about what you do, and why you do it. So again, we it's why we decided to spend the hour with you, and we appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for inviting me. Good luck with your podcast. You guys seem like great guys, and we love working with your team in Michigan. And thank you for helping dentists, man. It's what it's all about.
Likewise, Chuck.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so we just get